Hey everybody, it is Thorn coming at you from Box Hell. I was out of town last week and so have not made a ton of progress on my move. I'm sitting on the floor, procrastinating at my job. It's fine, right? It's all fine. But I wanted to make a video just because I've really had something on my mind, like really heavily the last couple of weeks, and I thought, okay, it's not a weekend, but I'll post a video. So I had an inquiry from a seeker come across my internet desk, my inbox, I guess a couple of weeks ago. And they had run into a situation that I'm going to misremember the specifics, but basically they've been looking for a coven. And I think they just read this on a website. I don't think that they were told this directly. But basically they ran into a situation where they approached a coven and they were told that this coven does not take folks who struggle with mental illness. I think specifically they didn't want people who were on antidepressants. And anyway, this seeker asked me if this was a typical experience. And so I wanted to come on and talk because clearly, like, this is a conversation we need to keep having. So let's keep having it. So this happened to me when I was first interested in joining a coven. I kind of began seeking in college and then started having more luck when I had graduated. So this is around like 2005 and into like 2000, probably like to the early 2010s, is when I was really looking for groups. And I was told explicitly by one coven that they weren't going to take me on until I was off of antidepressants, which is really goofy, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I'd had an email exchange with this coven, and this was something that they explicitly asked about. A lot of covens have questionnaires that they send out. You know, it's not necessarily typical for a seeker to just like cold email a coven and be like, "Hi, I'm mentally ill. Like, please initiate me." Like, that's not usually what happens. Usually it's the coven either coming out and saying on their website or their social media or whatever, you know, like, it'll say something like, we're interested in stable adults who have their lives together. If you take meds, we won't have a place for you. Or it usually is something like it's worded really like benignly. Or it comes out because the coven sends out some kind of questionnaire. So you've had some email exchanges. Maybe you've even met face to face and you could be asked explicitly if you struggled with those things. I've absolutely seen that. I've absolutely had that happen to me. And this was one of those situations where I'd been emailing with a pair of coven leaders and they asked about it. So I told them, like, yes, I take antidepressants. And that was where the conversation ended. So, my internet friends, this is a thing. It is a thing that kind of blows my mind just because the conversation about inclusivity, particularly in Wiccan spaces, has really been at the fore, as it should be. And yet, neurodivergence, like all kinds of neurodivergence, are very rarely included in that conversation. And I just think that that is bananas because I think people just don't realize how prevalent particularly something like depression is. So, here you go. I, Thorn Mooney, have been on various medications, anxiety meds, depression meds, whatever. I've struggled with substance abuse. I've struggled with self-injury, and I've been doing that most of my life. I've been on some med or another my entire adult life, with some gaps, right? And lots of therapy along the way. And that stuff is all normal. It's normal. It is healthcare. If you take meds for your mental health, that doesn't mean you can't be a witch. It doesn't mean you can't be an amazing initiate. It doesn't mean that you can't be a coven leader someday. It doesn't mean you can't be an author or a speaker or a teacher. Like, you can do all of those things. I think that... So, the reason this is so important to me specifically too, is like, I understand, like from a coven leader perspective, you absolutely do run into situations where you have people approach you and maybe they do have unique experiences or needs or whatever that you just don't feel equipped to handle. Okay, like that's a thing. And that I hope instigates larger conversations, okay? But my experience has been that overwhelmingly folks just don't know what mental illness actually looks like. Because here's the scenario that I run into over and over again. I meet people who say, oh, well, our coven doesn't take people on meds, or, you know, we wait for people to be better before we talk about initiation or something like that. Guys, you don't just magically stop being clinically depressed. Like, I'm going to be on meds for the rest of my life. Like, but we'll have these conversations and people will say things like that to me. And I'll go, really? Because look at all the stuff I'm on. And they'll go, oh my God, like, you've struggled with this? And that tells me that a lot of coven leaders just don't know what those things actually look like when they play out. Like, there's this stigma in place that people who struggle with mental illness, people who have histories of mental illness, people who take meds related to mental illness, like, we must all just be crazy and, like, unsavable and unmanageable. And, like, that's just offensive and incorrect. The reality is that a lot of people, like a sizable minority of people, probably lots of people in your immediate circle of friends and family, take meds and struggle with things, and you just don't know about it because either you're not paying attention or they didn't tell you, because it's nobody's fucking business. So we just have these assumptions in place. There's this stigma that just rules how we think about other people. And I just think that's a shame, and it kind of breaks my heart to hear stories from other people, because I have those stories too. And I think people just don't know. Like, I get told all the time, well, you work a job and you write books and you run a coven and you do all these other things, and, like, you're in grad school full time and blah, blah, blah. Like, you've been a teacher, like, you can manage classrooms and work with children. And, like, yeah, I can do a lot of shit because I take my meds. What, like, people just don't know. They just don't know. So if you are a seeker in this position, first, I'm sorry. There are absolutely covens out there that have these kinds of protocol in place. Covens are autonomous. They can do what they want, okay? And, like, sucks. And there's nothing inherently wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you can't be a magician or a witch, an amazing occultist. It doesn't mean that you can't do great things. And, you know, it's just that group's loss. And it's just going to take more waiting and seeking and time. It took me many years. Like, it was a struggle. And it sucks that it has to be that way. I don't think it does have to be that way, but it is, and it sucks, and I'm sorry. And, like, there's nothing wrong with you. So, and to covens that have those kinds of protocol in place, I beseech you, from box hell, my floor in my office, to reconsider, because I think, like, it totally makes sense to make individual choices about people as far as how they might fit into your group, whether or not you think that you can serve them. That all makes sense. But to kind of paint people with this broad brushstroke, like people who take antidepressants, you know, people who struggle with whatever, people who have histories with drug abuse or alcoholism, whatever, like, to just totally, like, whole cloth write off groups of people when you're literally talking about your own neighbors and your own family and maybe your favorite authors and coven leaders and writers. Like, you're just writing off whole groups of people because of an assumption. So please don't do that, because, like, I wouldn't be here if my own coven leaders had had a policy like that. So anyway, that's all. I know that there are a lot of folks out there who struggle with this, because my blog that I wrote 100 years ago, and I wish that I could sort of rewrite it. Although now that I say that, it's a blog and I could totally rewrite it if I wanted it to. But my most, like, well-circulated thing is being depressed and being Wiccan. And that just tells me that there's a whole ass lot of us out here. So it's a thing, regardless of whether or not you're Wiccan, whatever kind of witch flavor you're into. Have a good day. I'm going to stop procrastinating, and pray Satan.